When I made the decision to run through my backlog, this was one of the games that I was really excited to play because of how underrated I hear people say it is. An FPS game on the N64 that's pseudo 3D that came out on a console where every franchise was going full 3D. How could it not be underrated? Doom 64 for a really long time was seen as the forgotten game, the hidden gem lost to time due to its exclusivity to the N64. All of that changed, however, when Night Dive Studios did the impossible and ported the game over to modern systems. And now, it's in my Steam library, fully playable in all of its glory. And right off the bat, the changes are clear. From the soundtrack, the visuals, and even the level design. The overall tone of the game changed from a tongue-in-cheek action game to a much darker action horror sci-fi game. If these games were movies, Doom 1 and 2 would be Evil Dead, while Doom 64 would be something like Alien. It's not surprising that the game that followed was more survival horror than it was action, but that's a discussion for a different time. Going back to the soundtrack, it truly is amazing how drastic the pivot was sonically, but still managed to keep the all-impending doom feeling to it. The combination of ambient synths and heavy guitars is like the PB&J that gives this doom sandwich its texture. A sound so aggressive but not intrusive that it pulls you from the immersion. Something that cannot be said about the prior games. The digitized heavy metal soundtrack of classic Doom never felt like a score, but rather just a playlist of heavy metal songs. Almost like if Doom Guy had a Spotify playlist, that's what it would be. Doom 64's soundtrack is so subtle that so many times I found myself walking through a level in damn near complete silence. All you would hear was the occasional cry from a synth and its growling bass, only to be interrupted by a point-blank range super shotgun to the face. Speaking of which, the visual design of your entire arsenal was given a complete makeover to better match the dark and gritty tone of the game's sound. Each weapon looks a lot more mechanical and futuristic, almost like they were ripped straight out of an Aliens movie. The overhauled textures push that resemblance even further. The combined visual and audio design make the weapons feel more powerful than they did before, assisted by the detail in the enemy design and animations. But don't get the wrong idea, the game is more than just aesthetic. Its substance lies in its gameplay. Tighter corridors, compact levels, and the occasional open arena keep the player on their toes. Methodical movement becomes just as important as the more erratic, brute force, run and gun pace that the previous games are known for. The level format itself, however, is still very familiar, relying on key cards and switches to progress through each level. But the way the maps are designed is a lot more methodical. Most of the maps in Doom 64 are smaller than most of the maps in Doom 1, 2, and its expansions. But Doom 64's ability to squeeze more out of less is truly impressive. Even with its shorter campaign length, Doom 64 still manages to leave a bigger impression by diverting away from the formula, but still keeping what worked and trimming what didn't. Some of the trimmings include the Archviles and Chain Gunners, probably the worst enemy types to ever be conceived. So no more damage taken from across the map via hit scan, and no more overpowered range attacks from an enemy that could spawn other enemies, literally cancer. But even with those trimmings, the game's still not perfect. One enemy that they didn't get rid of is the Lost Souls, and my complaint is not towards the enemy itself, but rather how overused they are throughout the entire game. On their own, they're not a problem, but in hordes, they start to feel slightly overpowered. It becomes difficult to track their movement, especially when the screen becomes too busy with enemies. And that perfectly sums up my final and largest complaint with the game, the final boss. It is the worst level in the entire game. It is the definition of manufactured difficulty. They throw every enemy at you in an open arena, so the only real strategy is to strafe around the room until the screen is cleared. The final boss is the least interesting part of this section, and I am, to this day, convinced that the way that I beat the boss was definitely not the right way to do it. It felt like I had cheesed my way to the end. So if that was the intended strategy, then that reflects poorly on the design of the boss. more than it does on my ability and skill. And it's really unfortunate that this was the best that could be done for this game, because up to that point I was really enjoying my time with everything that it had thrown at me with little to no complaints. But even with that frustrating ending, I still think that overall Doom 64 is by far the best experience out of the original 3. It is a great showcase of all the things that made the original Doom great, with some welcomed changes that give this game its own identity. It's a classic gem that doesn't deserve to be overlooked, but rather praised and known for its shining accomplishments. I do hope that more people get to play this game. If you haven't played Doom 64, please do. It embodies everything that makes a game a hidden gem. A fun and flawed experience that leaves a long and lasting impression.